Well, good evening. This is Thursday, August 26th. It's a wonderful hot evening here in Houston, but not necessarily as hot as one would expect it to be in Houston. It's been that kind of an odd kind of summer, weather just isn't predictable. But current events are predictable. They're all over the map all the time, aren't they? And so sometimes on public affairs, public access, I come to you, Paul Colby that is, I come to you and bring you an interesting sidelines perspective on what's going on and what's going down all about town and all about the globe, because not only are you watching us here in Houston on all your favorite basic cable, but you're also seeing us stream live across that World Wide Web. And by golly, howdy to all of you who are not here with me tonight or here in my vicinity tonight. Before I get started, you've seen some of my programs before, I'll bet, and you know that we try to cover a lot of territory. We're going to do that tonight, but I just have to tell you that we can't quite bring you the show that I really wanted to put before you tonight. All this month, I've been skimping on lunch and putting back a little extra change. I was going to rent a little satellite uplink sort of a thing and talk to a few people live with me here, kind of a la Larry King and CNN and all of the, well-financed networks. I was going to connect with some people out there and relate the story back here. For example, I thought we'd have a link up with Tony Hayward down there on the Gulf, helping people whose lives have been shattered, put them back together and maybe take a little change out of his pocket and kind of distribute it, to the people who are suffering. And then we were going to link up with Lindsay Lohan in jail and talk about, creature comforts, how it was, how she was getting along in her abbreviated stay, but from her point of view, I'm sure a pretty long stay. And then we were going to talk to the First Lady because, there's a new round of travel guides coming out, Europe on $5 a day and things like that. I wanted to get her feedback, and then I thought, since the United States is withdrawing from Iraq now on schedule, I'd arranged to talk to the last guy left there whose job it would be to turn out the lights, as we left town. But I got to tell you, it just wouldn't come together. For one thing, Tony Hayward doesn't seem to be down there on the beach or even in the nightclubs or anywhere helping the people out down there on the Gulf Coast. So kind of struck out. And Lindsay Lohan got out of jail barely 2 weeks into her sentence, and so, well, forget that. And looks like the First Lady, when she went to Spain, spent maybe a little more than $5 a day, so it would have been an odd conversation. And then it turns out that over there in Iraq, even though we're leaving, there's 50,000 people still there. And maybe 7,000 private, I don't know what we're going to call them, private defenders and assistants to the police force. Anyway, there's still 50,000 people there, and I doubted I'd get them all up on a satellite link. So forget my very ambitious project. We're going to have to just get back to real-time stuff. And we do still have quite a few areas that we want to get to, and we do have some insights that I think will be different than the ones you hear on talk radio for the most part, or even on the slanted to one side television networks, or the networks that present only superficial news. So yeah, I'm out there on the far left wing of progress. I'm a kind of a radical left, independent, metaphysical, humanist, populist. And so you get my perspective tonight to balance all the other things you've been hearing for a long time. And I'm checking my iPhone here periodically because the interesting thing about it is I'm able, with my new application here, to have a look at all of you out there. Well, actually, that's not true. I can just sense your temperature, all of you out there. Well, actually, that's not true either. It's more like that if your temperature is over 200 degrees and you're coming right at me, my application tells me that. But anyway, that's what I'm going to be doing, is checking on you who are watching me as I am watching you. Well, you know, a lot of people have been getting in trouble these days for saying things, and I guess that's a good place to start, saying things in public. Maybe they would have said them in private, but when they say them in public, it seems to backfire. Like, let's just take a real recent example, and we'll talk about some other things that have happened since I've seen you last. But the other day, Miss Philippines, who apparently was one of the crowd favorites at the Miss Universe pageant and seemed to be like, you know, pretty much had it wrapped up, blew it with an answer to a question right at the end. You know, they always ask a question at the end, and her answer apparently is what blew her out of the water. You know, it reminded me a lot of what's happened a few years ago in Miss Teen USA, but not exactly for the same reasons. The big question they asked her was whether there was one mistake that she'd made in her life that she would want to do something different about, do it right, okay? And basically what she said was, and I'm quoting, "There's nothing major, I mean a major problem that I've done in my life." And apparently that frustrated some people, and I've been trying to figure out why. Now, it may just be that people don't like hearing that somebody's never made a mistake, but I suppose, you know, if she had said that, well, really, I've made quite a few small mistakes, and if you put them all together, it's a hell of a mistake. She could have said something like that. Or she could have said, you know, well, there was that time that I stole the keys to the car and drove 200 miles to have breakfast. Or she could have said that I dissed one of my girlfriends that I really didn't like, and I wish I hadn't done that. Or maybe she could have said, you know, any number of things. But she really needed, I guess, to have something to be sorry for, and she wasn't sorry, and that shook a lot of people up. But you know, Miss Teenage USA, that was 2007 when we last heard the really bad answer, and that was from Lauren Callan Upton, Miss South Carolina, and I'm sure some of you remember when she talked about personally believing that U.S. Americans are unable to do so because some people out there in our nation don't have maps, and I believe that our education, like such as in South Africa and the Iraq, everywhere, like such as, and it went on. You know, it's the kind of thing that sounded like maybe Glenn Beck would have said before he gave up the booze, but in as much as Miss South Carolina did an about-face and pretty much recovered and made that platform something that she could work with, I'm hopeful that Miss Philippines will have the same opportunities. And so maybe there's going to be a silver lining in that cloud. But, you know, speaking of Glenn Beck, Glenn's been messing around with the N-word a lot lately, or one of the N-words, because there's other N-words, and I'll get to that in a minute, but his favorite is Nazi lately, and you've noticed that everybody who's not Glenn Beck potentially is a Nazi. So my staff told me when I prepared this briefing book that it would look very sophisticated if I used these glasses like, you know, some student of facts. Anyway, I'm going to do that because it does look sexy. I checked the picture before we started. Anyway, the latest problem that Glenn is having, in addition to calling everyone a Nazi, is attacking social and economic justice, because churches do that, and he understands, for reasons that are not apparent to all the rest of us, that that's not what the great religious teachers were talking about when they talked about economic and social justice. In fact, what has happened lately is that Glenn has gone out on a perch, and a lot of churches now are sort of fighting back and saying, you know, we've been in the economic and social justice business for a long time. Glenn is able to tell us from his point of view that Jesus would not have approved of the government's role in health reform here. Now, I don't want to speak for Jesus personally, although we used to be big pals back in the day, you know, one of my earlier lives, but I think he would have approached it somewhat differently. Glenn is entitled to his opinion, but I just wanted to point out something about that. Glenn is thinking it's the Marxists who are infiltrating our churches. And somehow he's able to get from that to an understanding that the churches are going to merge with the Democrats. And that's the kind of poison that is, it's either destroying the Democratic Party or religion or our way of life, or maybe all of them. So that's Glenn for you. But another person who's in trouble for using the N-word lately, another N-word, that would be Dr. Laura, who I have to say, I straddle the fences on a lot of these subjects. In the context of what I've read from a transcript of what Dr. Laura said recently on a show, I have to agree with her in part on something she said. And that was that the point that she was making is that even though it wasn't okay for her to use one of the N-words, it was okay for a lot of black comedians on HBO to use them. And I've always thought, yes, that is interesting, and I certainly expected all of the people like the ACLU and the liberals to pounce on her for saying it, but I thought there is a point to be made there. However, there is also the point that Dr. Laura is ever so slightly homophobic and takes her orthodox positions way, way down the line. And as a result of that, she's been giving a lot of people a lot of advice that I would consider inappropriate for a long time, and some of you might too. But the real issue here is Dr. Laura is now worried that her First Amendment free speech rights have been taken away. She's a victim. Now, a lot of us, if we'd had 30 years of press attention, wouldn't feel that victimized, but she seems to have one kind of a misconception about free speech, and that is that in free speech, of course, you are certainly allowed to say things, but what is not protected is how people will react to the things you say. You see, the first thing that you have to know is that if you say something in public and somebody disagrees with it, well, the consequence might be that, for example, they talk to your sponsor of your TV or radio show and say, I'm not buying those cookies anymore if you let this person keep saying that stuff. So the First Amendment doesn't protect Dr. Laura from what people, how people react to what it is that she says. And so that's a problem where, you know, she can say what she wants, but there could be consequences. Now, somebody else, I already mentioned Lindsay Lohan, and she's already out of jail. Now, she got in trouble for using the F word. In fact, using the F word on her fingernails, and in such a way that it could be seen by the judge, the epithet that she was presenting forward. And she seems to think now, as a result of some recent developments, that she's been wronged by the system. I'm talking about the system of justice. And that's because it turns out some of her doctors say that she was misdiagnosed, that she doesn't have ADD, and she's not addicted to methamphetamines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that means in her mind that she got run around here by the justice system, and she wants some restitution because she got sentenced to 90 days beyond bars. But what she's forgetting is that this troubled actress, you see, was violating her terms of probation, driving while intoxicated, and so it really doesn't matter this other stuff. The judge certainly had the right and did sentence her because she violated probation. And if you're a judge, sorry, Lindsay, or Leho, I guess they like to call her these days, the judge doesn't have to say she's sorry, because if you're wearing a robe, you rarely have to say you're sorry. And speaking of saying you're sorry, well, we have another person who spoke up in public and really really got carried away, and that's Andrew Swift-Bart. Oh, excuse me, I mean Andrew Bryboat, or the name will come to me. Anyway, Andy is pretty well known for trying to take people down with dirty tricks. He's kind of the new generation dirty trickster, but you know, after he tried to take down Shirley Sherrod with a video that left out the most important parts, the tide turned against him in the public mind, because Shirley did a very good job of explaining herself, not only in the end of the video that he didn't show, but also in many subsequent press opportunities afterwards and on TV and so forth. And so what has happened since then is that Andy feels like he is public enemy number 1 or number 2, I'm not sure why he said it that way, of the Democratic Party. And according to Andrew, the liberal media outlets are shifting the focus to the misleading excerpting in the videos that he posted to divert attention from what he asserts is a double standard on racist behavior exposed by the video, which of course the video didn't expose. The video showed somebody who had learned a life lesson, but Andy didn't really care about that. Andy was trying to make a point. I call him Andy only because these people are all my friends. Anyway, Andy volunteers that Shirley hasn't got past black and white, and that he since has been inundated with falsehoods. Another case of a perpetrator deciding that they're a victim. My goodness, it just seems to go on and on. So people will talk, and those people have been talking, and it seems like they're sort of getting their comeuppance just on the basis of what people think about what they said. We always talk, I'm going to leave that subject for now, although we may circle back in another context, but we always try to talk to you about jobs in the economy, and since things haven't gotten very much better lately, there isn't much I can do. I noticed that for one thing, a lot of people's unemployment insurance is running out and things like that, and there aren't just that many jobs available. So I've noticed on the internet lately that a lot of people are looking at interesting things that people are renting. For example, one internet posting talked about a person renting themselves as a bridesmaid, another renting themselves as a pilgrim, another renting themselves as a stalking clown, renting themselves as a friend, etc. Well, that might be one interesting way for people to get work that have been out of work for a while, is to find novel ways to rent themselves out. One man, for example, is renting his cows. It occurred to me that a lot of people don't have cows, but they do have dogs, and maybe they could be renting their dogs to people who don't know if they want a dog, so that when they take a vacation, instead of sending their dog off to a kennel, they could simply send their dog to somebody who wants a dog for a brief vacation period to kind of try it out. Maybe people also want maybe people want to hire photographers to come around with them, or a new age version of sycophants in this modern day and age. And I think maybe a lot of political campaigns that start off well and start to sag probably would hire a lot of people to pretend like they're supporters, so that they'd have nice looking crowds at all of their displays. But a lot of people are also approaching it by getting rid of things that they don't need anymore. And so that's another thing, like probably we don't need shoes, and we don't need bank accounts and things like that. I mean, if you can cut down in those areas, you can save a little money. But I noticed this week that in the DC area that there is a job fair for people who have top security clearances, because after 9/11, the market for private surveillance of all kinds has grown dramatically, and some people with top secret clearances are able to get a lot of work in these new private areas that do the surveillance that only Big Brother used to do in the past. Now it's kind of privatized, so everybody gets to do surveillance. So if you've got a top secret clearance, I suggest you get yourself up to DC and kind of look around at some of those opportunities. That might get you there. As for the rest of the economy, I got to tell you, we keep hearing about jobs that illegal aliens are taking from everybody else, and I'm thinking maybe we just need to set up another government program that matches people up with jobs that illegal aliens are doing and replaces them with people who aren't illegal aliens who are looking for work. But other than that, I got to say, the job situation and the economy is a mess, and it's especially true if you think about the Gulf Coast and the problem we're having in the aftermath of the oil spill. You know probably which one I'm talking about. Okay, in the aftermath of the oil spill, there is some concern about whether the seafood in the Gulf region is actually safe to eat. And we know that while the government has been so-called testing the food and saying that it's safe, we have heard in hearings just this week that there's a few things that they haven't tested for, like arsenic and mercury and other toxic heavy metals in seafood. They're testing other stuff. And we also know that dispersant was being used in the oil spill. In fact, a specific kind of dispersant, which I think you've probably heard the name of now, Corexit. And there's a label from the can. If you were to look at some Corexit, you'd find that you shouldn't get it in your eyes or on your clothes or in your hands, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's not very good for you. And that dispersant, of course, goes deep down to the bottom of the ocean. It's breaking up the oil. It also seems to be breaking up the food chain. It's going way down to the bottom. And the only thing is that it also seems to be coating some of the fish that come out of the Gulf. And so there aren't that many good recipes for dispersant, you know, in, say, a soy marinade or something like that. Not that I know of. And so people are concerned about the eating of the food. And one of the horrific aspects of this situation right now is that in some cases the Gulf seamen who are starting to fish once more are being held responsible for toxic seafood. In other words, being forced to sign waivers making them liable for the toxins in their catch. That probably doesn't sit well with a whole lot of people. And what this means is that while some of these people are suffering, and suffering in a big way, we know that, say, Tony Hayward is doing pretty well with his $1.6 million package and his $17 million pension that he's got. And that means that the rest of us are, if we are seamen on the Gulf Coast, are probably out of work. And if we're consumers who eat seafood, and that doesn't include me because I'm a vegetarian, and we'll circle back around to that, we may be worrying where we go next. Now, before I paint a picture of doom, I do want to say, there are always hopeful signs. But, you know, we could be doing something other than putting dispersant on the oil to break it up and go down to the bottom of the sea. We could have been letting Gaia, that's Mother Nature, do the trick. And it turns out, according to a report that is that is written by Randolph Schmidt this week in AP Science Writer, Science has discovered that there are indeed new bacteria that seem to be profoundly interested in the oil that's under the ground and are going about eating it very well. In fact, the headline says, "New microbe discovered eating oil spill in the Gulf." So maybe there will be a rosy picture, and maybe these bacteria will even learn to like dispersant. Now that's asking for a lot, I know. What this means is that a lot of people who are used to eating seafood may have to be making some choices about what they eat and looking for other things to eat. And so I always try to offer as a public service some tips that aren't out there in the mainstream media. And I think, you know, we as Americans are kind of, we're in a special coddled position, and we take a whole lot for granted. And since everything tastes like chicken except steak and seafood, then we always assume that's the only thing there is to eat. But maybe we need to start looking at more things that taste like chicken and some things that don't taste like chicken. But maybe we're going to have to shut our eyes while we do this. In other words, here's what I want to tell you. There's lots of food out there, lots of food. My staff has worked all week looking around for the possibilities here, and I can tell you that there's plenty that we can eat, even if, worse comes to worse, we don't have seafood. For example, in other parts of the world, people eat scorpions, and they eat beetles, and they eat grub worms. All of these things, I can't tell you that they taste like this or that or the other, because frankly, I haven't got there yet. But I just want you to know there's an abundance of things like that. You don't have to stop there. We have, for example, in other places of the world, dried lizard in great abundance, and we could probably find plenty of lizards here in America to dry if we had to. Or another popular dish from around the world involves some ant eggs that, well, I'm not sure what they do, but I don't think they're alive anymore when they get to this condition. Now, you know, these are not things that would be hard to come by, and if we don't trust our seafood anymore, then maybe we should be looking here. Now, I'll tell you the truth. People are already starting to look in other places, because America, you know, a lot of the cosmopolitan centers of America have many kinds of restaurants. Even Houston has many kinds of restaurants. And what is it you can find if you have lots of restaurants? Well, let me tell you some more. For the adventurous eater, already you can find caterpillar and other recipes. I hate to tell you that we don't have them here, but if you go to Chicago, you can get yourself a plate of bugs. These are mostly larvae and I forget what they all are, but don't they look good? We have so many in the backyard. In addition to this, you have, as I say, caterpillars, and you have, in addition to the white ant eggs, you have other colors of eggs that would be very handy. You have grasshoppers and mealworms and silkworm larvae. All of those are very nice sources of protein, and you can go a long way with those. So here, as you can see, I'm trying to focus on things that don't necessarily come from the sea. They come from the land. So everything is cool, right? You know, they're in great abundance. In other parts of the world, they're already eating them, and we could be too. Now, if we've got to go to the sea, oh, you thought I was going there. Now, I have to set you up for this picture. If we do have to go to the sea, then, or some bodies of water, then maybe we should go to bodies of water that aren't our own. You see what I'm saying? Now, for example, if in other parts of the world, you can get giant water bugs, and I think these are supposed to taste like either shrimp or a baseball glove, something. But a giant water bug obviously would be on top of the body of water and not way down at the bottom where things have gotten real bad. If we just want to import seafood, well, we can get tuna eye from Asia. That probably is really tasty. And, you know, we could get snakefish heads. Those are supposed to be real good too. One thing, let's put it this way, a lot of people might be brave enough to go there with me. Now, some people know that in parts of the world, even cockroaches are eaten, and they just couldn't go that far. They couldn't possibly go that far, even though they know that in certain parts of the world, maybe remote or maybe, you know, maybe backwoods, that does happen. But I got to tell you that we sometimes ingest cockroaches already, whether we want to or not, and that is on the basis of coffee. It turns out that in coffee that has been processed in these huge stockpiles, that they are frequently infested by roaches, and it's just too much trouble. In fact, it's virtually impossible to get the roaches out. And so sometimes that real bitter taste might come from somewhere that you're not expecting. So what I'm saying, I guess, is that if we're already eating cockroaches and we don't know it, maybe we should just, you know, kind of get used to it. Anyway, there's a lot of food out there, and I hope it doesn't come to that. But if it does, we don't have to starve, okay? You don't have to starve. You just have to look the other way while you're eating. So, what else is going on? Well, you've probably heard lots from the birthers from the last, almost from the time that Obama was elected, and even before he got elected. You heard from the birthers stories about Obama and where he was born. And right now, probably still out there on your grocery store checkout lane, you've got more articles in Globe talking about Obama having a fake social security number and being born in somewhere other than Honolulu, Hawaii. Yes, indeed. I looked at that Globe article myself because I thought it was worth seeing if anybody had new evidence. And of course, it's in the tradition of such articles, you'll find that Globe quotes a Washington insider and sources who told Globe and a Beltway insider. And the only person who is actually quoted and not on the subject of having actually seen anything would be a top investigator named Susan Daniels. Well, you know, I learned something as part of this experience here because I wanted to find out how I could get in contact with Susan Daniels. Actually, I wondered if there was a Susan Daniels because everybody else is a Beltway insider, you know, or some kind of source. Well, it turns out that there is a site called investigator.com. In fact, there's many sites, but they only list people by region, by state, you know, where that sort of a thing, and it really didn't help me a lot. And, you know, when I go to the internet, I am always thinking that I can find something. Now, if you can't read this, I'll tell you what I did. I searched for Susan Daniels, private investigator, and my search said that it did not match any records. So I said, well, that just goes to show you what I thought. But then I said, well, let's be diligent about this and try Susan Daniels' top investigator. And son of a gun, I did find one. So I guess what I'm telling you here in your lesson about internet searching, always try all of your options. But let's go a little deeper. I really wasn't impressed by what Susan had to say, and I have to tell you, it looks like a whole lot of more of the same, because what we had a couple of years ago, now you'll remember, of course, that Obama did put his birth certificate of live birth out there during the campaign so people could see, yeah, there is a certificate of live birth, and it's talking about Honolulu. And you know that by now, the stories about Obama not being from the United States, i.e. Hawaii, they have gone in many directions. For example, there was the famous forged Kenyan birth certificate, which purports to show that Obama is really from Kenya. And of course, that's been taken apart a couple of times. It had some errors in it. One thing being the publication date of February 17, 1964, even though the Republic of Kenya was not a republic until December 12 of 1964, and a signature by the register E.F. Lavender, which is a pun on the famous detergent Earth-Friendly Lavender and so on. But, of course, the people using this hoax wanted to put Obama in Mombasa, one of the Muslim parts of the country. Of course, that was taken apart, and one of the other documents that surfaced later. Now, if you haven't seen it, there's that Kenyan birth certificate, the phony one. There's also a document that purports to be from school. I know you can't read this, so I'll tell you what it says, and I'll tell you the context. And that context was that when Obama's mom remarried to an Indonesian, and he was applying for a school, there's a form filled out that says he's from Indonesia, and that seems to be the work of the stepdad who just put that on there. Doesn't prove anything, but what it does prove is that in the context of this, the birthplace once again is listed as Honolulu. So the stories, they just They just never hold any water, but the people who want to believe them are not importuned by that. In fact, you know, you heard a candidate for the governorship of Colorado saying recently, as for Obama, if his wife says Kenya is his homeland, why don't we just send him back? And of course, that was based on a slip of the tongue, a slip up, an error in syntax that Michelle Obama made in a speech when she called Kenya the home country, not homeland. In other words, that was the place where he spent a lot of time. It wasn't the place where he was born. It reminds me of Jack Kennedy. I remember when Jack Kennedy was president, he went to Ireland, which was actually his home port, even though he was born here. So, as I said, it won't satisfy anybody who wants to believe it, but it's interesting that another Colorado Tea Party candidate, Ken Buck, he calls himself a Tea Party candidate, when hearing this stuff from the candidate for governor and hearing more and more about the birther issue, every time he talked, said on an audio recording when he didn't think that he was being monitored backstage, will you tell those dumb, I'm going to not use a D word here, at the Tea Party to stop asking questions about birth certificates while I'm on camera. And so that's where it goes. But incidentally, that reminds me, while I'm here and talking about Hawaii, do you really think Don Ho, who sang Tiny Bubbles, can I sing a little of it for you? Well, I didn't arrange for the copyright. I'd love to sing a little Tiny Bubbles for you, but I wonder if Don Ho is really from Hawaii. You know, he's of Chinese, Hawaiian, Portuguese, Dutch, and German descent. Now, what does that mean? My goodness. Well, anyway, you know what it is. The right wing is very interested in painting Obama as Muslim, so these birth certificates are important because they want to put him in Mombasa or somewhere, anywhere other than being a legitimate president of the United States. And they want him to be a Muslim as if being Muslim was against the law in the United States, but he obviously isn't. And they're obviously trying to pull all of this together to the current story in the headlines about a mosque. Now, there's somebody coming in here, as I thought, yes, somebody with a temperature of just 182 degrees is out there. I'm not sure who that would be, but if I find out, I'll let you know. Anyway, this is all about the current mosque issue, and I'm sure you've heard much, 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 much more than you want to hear about it right now. So I'm going to confine my discussion to just a couple of points here. And one of those points has to do with Imam Ralph, who is a complex figure, but the figure at the center of this. And it's worth pointing out that the man wanting to build this mosque in this area happens to have been associated with former President George Bush's Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice and Bush advisor Karen Hughes. It's kind of, you know, these people will say whatever they need to say, but what they're focusing on is the fact that you shouldn't have a Muslim site, you shouldn't have a mosque, you shouldn't have Islam there, and since it's a sacred site, I guess all we want there is monuments. So let's think in terms of sacred sites. It is a sacred site because innocent people got killed there, 3,000. So what happened after innocent people got killed there, 3,000? The United States went and attacked Iraq, who had nothing to do with 3,000 people being killed there. And so we have innocents killed by American forces in Iraq. I believe the number killed sort of makes all of Baghdad a sacred site, considering our shock and awe that began that campaign. But have you thought recently about how many people are in the way of our bullets when we go into a country illegally? In the case of Iraq, there have been various estimates, and I won't read them all, from 7 or 8 different bodies covering 7 or 8 different time periods, not the full range. But if you go and take all of those figures and put them together, a conservative estimate of how many civilians have been killed or injured, not counting all the people who have left Iraq, but just those killed, we're well over 1 million. And some go as high as 1.4 million. So, for 3,000 people who were innocent Yes, sacred site, no question about it. For all of the people who are in the way of American bullets, and especially in unjust wars, well, we've been creating more sacred sites around the earth for a long period of time than anybody else has. We have made about 200 distinct military invasions or overtures, not counting all of the CIA operations, about 200 military incursions since World War II, all over the place. You can look it up yourself. There's one of the best studies that I've come across is by Zoltan Grossman, a faculty member in Geography and Native American Studies at Evergreen State College. He catalogs military interventions from Wounded Knee to Iraq, and it's pages and pages and pages and pages. Why am I telling you this? Sacred sites are not just the ones where our civilians get killed. Sacred sites are where innocents get killed, if we want to take that to its conclusion. Having said that, excuse me, having said that, we seem to have a blind eye about other people's sacred sites, particularly American Indians, because American Indian sacred sites are where we have traditionally, for the last 20 years, been trying to dump our nuclear waste. I'm sure that you've heard about this, but we don't hear enough about it. The federal government and the commercial nuclear power industry started targeting Native American reservations for such dumps a long time ago. In 1987, the Congress created the Office of the Nuclear Waste Negotiator in an effort to open a federally monitored retrievable storage site for high-level nuclear waste. And they went shopping around all of the sacred sites of American Indians. To me, it just goes to show you that one man's sacred site is not another man's sacred site, and that's all I have to say about it. We're talking about Manhattan, which, according to legend, we purchased, or, well, we who came over purchased from Indians for $24, so that area of the Twin Towers was itself a sacred American Indian site. So, enough on that subject. But that's not the only subject that involves birthers. There's another wing of the birthers right now, and that involves terrorist babies. I'm sure you've heard a little about that lately because a couple of the principal personages who are responsible for this story are right here from Texas. Louis Gohmert is in the area of Nacogdoches, Tyler, that region of the world, and Louis has been getting a lot of time not only on the floor of Congress but on TV by pointing out that there are, and the story changes a little bit, so let me get the original story. Terrorists sending pregnant illegal alien women to the United States for the purpose of giving birth to American citizens only to take them back to un-American countries for terrorist indoctrination in preparation for future legal alien terrorist invasion. How about that? What a plot, huh? And a local Houstonian person in Congress, Debbie Riddle, has said the same thing. Both of them said their source was retired FBI that they couldn't name. Now, of course, Mr. Gohmert later changed that and said it was a lady on a plane who was kind of talking about, you know, well, we're just going over there to set up a baby and then we're going to bring it back and we're going to, you know, then later we'll go over and then, well, you never know what you'll hear on a plane these days. But even though I was going to research this for you, I went back through months and months of FBI top 10 headlines. And of course, there was no mention of terrorist baby sagas, but I didn't have to go to that trouble because on CNN, the FBI's assistant director in the Office of International Operations came forward. He was a little tired of hearing the stories. He pointed out that the FBI has 75 offices overseas, including offices in Jordan, Turkey, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Pakistan, and said Mr. Fuentes, there has never been a credible report, or any report for that matter, coming across through all the various mechanisms of communication to indicate that there was such a plan for these terror babies to be born. But It's quite a story, huh? That kind of FBI story. Well, boy, that sounds like the X-Files. That sounds like something that Mulder and Scully may have stumbled on, you know, accidentally going through one of those dark rooms with all of the files. In fact, I've got to tell you something now, and this is kind of a top secret. After I tell you this, I'm going to have to deny it ever happened, and that's why I also have this app on the iPhone. It's a lot like you saw. It's a lot like you saw in some other movie that I won't mention, where I'm going to have to erase your memory after I tell you. But here's what's really going on, and it's a barn burner story. It's already set up under the cover of our reformed healthcare system. Okay. It's already set up that any time somebody comes over here to illegally give birth to a baby in the United States, to take it back over there to a terrorist country where indoctrination follows, well, here's what happens. They implant a little GPS finder in the newborn infant. I can't tell you where in the body they do that, but I'm just going to tell you that they do. And when they do, they send them back. Because they already know that this is going on. Who are they? I can't say. I can't say. Retired FBI told me this. I can't say. But you know those electric fences that keep dogs from going outside when they bark? All you got to do is put a collar on them and you can shock them into staying where they belong. Well, we've got a new version of this. And when those terrorists come back 20 years from now, they've got a little chip in them. And as soon as they get close to our border, they're going to get the shock of their life. Now, I didn't tell you that. Okay. Congressman Gomert and Congressman Riddle had a pretty good story there. But you know what's behind all of this? These people don't like illegal aliens. They don't like immigrants, and they want to build a wall. And I was thinking, you know, I personally oppose a wall. I really, really oppose a wall. But if we're going to build build a wall. If we're going to build a wall, why don't we just build it around the whole country? Now, first thing I told you is we didn't have very much good economic news. Not very much good economic news, okay? So one way we could put a lot of people to work is to just wall in America completely. And one thing I think is that if we're going to be secure, then we have to think about how well people can maneuver over, you know, tiny 4-foot walls or 6-foot walls or 10-foot walls. Do you know what the current record for a pole vault is? Okay, I didn't think you were paying attention. It's over 20 feet. It's over 20 feet. And if these terrorists who come back are dedicated after 20 years of being indoctrinated and coming back to the States to break in and do some violence, boy, that'll be a long time from now. Who knows what kind of music they'll be playing on the radio. Anyway, we better be sure that even if they pole vault, they can't get over the wall. So it's got to be about a 25-foot high wall, right? And all over the country. Now, we have a tremendous amount of waste all over America. You do know that, don't you? I'm talking about waste products, all sorts of waste products. There is an engineer, and my staff found this for me. I was so highly interested. A civil engineer at the University of Utah in Salt Lake City who's come up with a scheme that can reuse a whole bunch of excess trash by making it into a building material. So my concept is we're building 25-foot walls. We're building them across the entire country. We're putting hundreds of people to work. And think about this, all those artists who can't make enough money to live comfortably. I'll tell you what the artists can do. They can make those walls top-notch. Okay? Is that progress? Well, we really can't stop the hateful talk that comes from the right wing about immigrants or about Obama or anything else, and it is highly frustrating to me. But I really think we should be reaching out to those people, all right? And in an inclusive way. Now, you know what they do. They just make up a story. We've talked about this, and they don't really care that much about what's factual or not. But I think if we were doing the stories, they might look something like this. We people who are tired of hearing it, You know, we're tired of hearing this noisy talk. And let me just show you by way of example, and then I'll explain myself. Limbaugh's gut, said to be home to hundreds of species of bacteria. This could be a news story. And here's another one. Palin on target to produce over 100,000 pounds of poop. And here's another one. Here's another one you might like. Beck and Hitler linked. Both had parents, first names, spoke their native languages, and breathed oxygen regularly. Now, what is it about all of this stuff that's different about hate talk from the right wing? Well, all of these things are true, and they're things that all of these fine people with different views than mine share with me, owner of a human body. For example, as for human flora and fauna, that number of 500, that's pretty small. All of us, Rush Limbaugh, you and me, all of you, and the guy out there, the temperature of 180 degrees coming in here because he didn't like what I was saying. Let me tell you about that. All of us have about 500 to 1,000 species of bacteria living in the human gut. And almost the same number, similar number on the skin. And we're talking here about bacterial flora and archaean flora and fungal flora and flora of all sorts, okay? So see, that's not even a false statement. That's just a fact that we are linked by virtue of being in a human body with having these particular conditions. Now, as for how much poop in a human lifetime, hey, that's pretty interesting dinner talk, right? But a typical human produces about 1,460 pounds of poop per year. So you just do the math, just take the standard age configuration, and that's what you get. And while we're at it, you know, how many times does an average human fart in a lifetime? Well, you can do your own calculations, but based on basically 14 farts daily and considering a normal lifespan, maybe over 400,000. And of course, what I mentioned about Mr. Beck and Mr. Hitler is no less illogical than what he has to say about Marxists and Hitler and Nazis and socialism and so forth. But those aren't the kind of stories that you see on our news. What you see is what is interesting to watch, and lately that's the Tea Party and a bunch of non-stories. If you looked at real stories, if you wanted to look at real stories, I suggest that you make a habit of every year purchasing the Project Censored book on the top 10 stories not brought to you by the mainstream media in any given year. And I don't really have time to get through all of them, but I will tell you that, well, I don't have time. This is something you should do for yourself. I mean, basically, we're living in a society now where we have manufactured news, and instead of having an aggressive press that actually gets to the facts on important subjects, we have to rely on WikiLeaks, and bravo for WikiLeaks, and bravo for the people who put things out there that we need to hear. By the same token, we have junk science that is everywhere these days, but mostly in the news. I mean, we have a fable in the United States about what happened on 911, and for anybody who has never gone to look at the 911 truth site, you have some eyes to be opened. If you look at the top 40 reasons why that story about 911 is ridiculous, my favorite has to do with the temperature of jet fuel and the temperature of melting steel, about 1,000 degrees apart. And once you start absorbing some of the small elements like that, and 40 is not the limited number of how many things are wrong. That's just top 40. You'll know that we have had the last decade go by basically where believing in a particular story and a manufactured threat and a manufactured response to a war on terror, we have basically lost all of our civil liberties, and we've put tons of money down the drain that could have paid for the health care reform that we really need in this country. And as a parting thought, when we have a system that just makes insurance companies and big pharmaceutical companies the main players in healthcare. We didn't get any healthcare reform, which we could have really got. And we could have easily paid for health reform that would have been real health reform by spending less money on things that don't make us safe. And maybe in the next little session where we get together, we'll talk more about healthcare and healthcare reform and the things that would constitute real healthcare reform rather than health insurance reform, but it is a big subject. I just want you to think to yourself when you watch TV, and I don't watch that much, but I see enough to see the silly commercials for pharmaceuticals that tell you that if you have thoughts of suicide after taking this drug, you might want to stop using it. My goodness, that's what it's come to. If you think clear, eat nutritious food, do some meditation of some sort so that you clear your head, and if you look clearly instead of letting the mass media present you a picture of a spectacle that changes every day, then you'll find this is still a beautiful place to live, and there's a lot of beautiful people around you, that you should spend time getting to know. And it's been a pleasure being here with you, as it always is, and we never get to everything we wanted to talk about, but I've enjoyed it. I hope you have. Thanks.
I used to be a yes man with no future. I used to be a cog on some big wheel. Inequities of every sort I endured, and so I caught myself a better deal. Consequently, meet the new me. I don't mind if you're with me or against. I'm the boss and I haven't looked back since. I used to spend the whole game on the sidelines, fantasizing I make some big play. And then I took a good look at the guidelines. I realized that I've been led astray. Say, can you see? It's the new me. I don't mind if you're truly unconvinced. I believe every pauper is a prince. And if you change your point of view,